former CIA covert op Mike Baker joining me, security brief host Paul Violas, and forensic criminologist and medical investigator Ron Martinelli. Ron, what is it that someone like yourself would be doing right now as this situation evolves?
Well, a person like me would come in later, to analyze what the actions of the police were in the individual. What I get involved in as a former tactical officer as well as a retired detective is active shooter training to citizens. As a matter of fact, I produce active shooter training for Riverside and San Diego County. So right now, plotting what the police response is going to be, and I think that a number of people that have articulated that, and then also talking about what the possible stressors are that might have precipitated this event. Let's not forget that this is the final example.
Okay, Ron, it seems that I'm losing you right now, but Ron was making the point that he'd be looking at what exactly precipitated this event. For example, they have final exams going on right now. Paul, we know that they were having graduation ceremonies next week. So some of these sort of more emotional type things that might play into a potential suicide event?
It could. But again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier with respect to taking a good solid look at the pedigree of the victims so that can help us create a benchmark as to who we may be looking for as a shooter, since we both know we don't know who that is yet.
Yeah. Again, as we watch these live pictures, you can see hundreds of police officers there are on the scenes, and we're going back and forth between a number of different shots, but you've got some SUV vehicles pulling up right now. We saw some SWAT teams going in earlier as they try and evacuate everyone there from that building. We are getting reports that they were actually looking at each of the students, basically patting them down, inspecting them to search them, of course, to see if they had any weapons on them. One would have to imagine, Mike, that this is happening in each of the buildings right now, not just in Bolter Hall, the scene of the murders?
Well, they're focused on the primary site, but yes, you're correct in the sense that, and has been mentioned by Paul and others previously, you can't assume anything, and so you have to take into account when you're setting up your perimeter and then working in from there, you have to assume that you potentially have a problem in other facilities out there. Look, there's just a lot that we don't know. Unconfirmed reports of a suicide note and a handgun being found, not knowing the identities yet, at least we don't, of the victims, not knowing if one of the victims perhaps is in fact the shooter, not knowing if there were more than one shooter. So there's a great deal that needs to be processed here. Again, the good news, I suppose, if you want to refer to it in that way, is that these various law enforcement organizations, elements of LAPD and others, have a great deal of practice doing this, and there's a methodology involved, and it's unsatisfying to all of us who want answers immediately. Satisfying, imagine, to the parents and family members who have students or loved ones that are on campus for one reason or another. That lack of information can be very frustrating. But just like with the Egypt air crash or any other investigation, you have to work through these processes. There's no shortcuts here.
Ron Martinelli, as we talk about the information and the process for getting this information and gathering this information from the authorities' perspective, and then, of course, disseminating it, interestingly, there's always little bits and pieces that tend to leak out via the media. So, for example, we were getting reports that the two victims in this case were male. However, James Herron, the UCL, a police officer that was just questioned by reporters, said that he had not heard that information. So how much sharing of information is really happening right now here in the present?
Well, I think part of the problem is that you've got, several agencies that are responding. So there's, this is LAPD's jurisdiction. You have to figure out what their unified command might be. But don't forget, we've got FBI, we've got ATF, you have local officers, you've got federal officers involved. So there is going to be some disconnects with communication. And the next thing, speaking of good news, partial good news is we don't have any more reports of anybody else being shot. And so then we go through the standard, operating procedure or protocol, which is responding, identify the shooter, identify the location, isolate and containing the building, rapid entry into the building, evacuation of students and faculty, and then an attempt to further isolate and contain the shooter or engage them if they're a threat, if not negotiate with them. So that's what's going on right now. But I totally get the disconnect in communication.
You know, and again, a reminder, we're getting reports that they are now moving groups of students out of the buildings with their hands up. They're searching them. But Paul, how do you wall off that entire campus? I mean, couldn't someone just cross the streets and, you know, wander off into the city of Los Angeles?
No question. There's no doubt about that. I mean, and that's not a lack of preparedness on the part of the police department. That's just a fact. I mean, that's something that's just a blatant fact. The police are doing a great job with doing this by containment with respect to inner and outer perimeter. But the bottom line is, though, Trish, you look at the numbers involved here. This really comes down to one thing that we don't know yet. And I think the newspaper, what do you call it, the UCLA Bruin or whatever it is?
That's it.
We need to hold them accountable right now. I want an answer from them. How did you find out this information about who the shooter was? Where did you get that description? That really is something that we need to know.
Because again, as we talk about the information coming out in drips and drabs, they of course reported earlier that the student was roughly 6 feet tall, male, with a black hoodie and black pants, which thus means that someone must have called in to them, potentially a student, maybe somebody who was there in the classroom that was an eyewitness. You're looking at some pictures there of students outside another building there on campus. We just saw them gathering at the steps. I just, you know, I look at those kids and I know if one of them were mine, I want to make sure that they were safely away in their dorm room or off the campus at this point. Is it wise for them to be standing outside there?
Well, it's wise for them to be contained at this point because you really don't want them walking about the campus or trying to get off the campus because we don't know where the shooter is. And in fact, we don't know if we have more than one shooter. So as much as parents really want to have this expeditious result right now, and which is understandable, that's just not feasible at this point. The police are doing what they need to do to contain it and methodically go about the campus to identify if there are any more victims and to pursue the investigation with respect to the shooting.
The reality is there are just so many questions right now, and people are looking for answers, but we don't have them, as the police department there in LA, along with the UCLA police and FBI, all try and search for this shooter. Again, active shooter situation going on with 2 dead. We're going to be right back with more.